in order to explain why I hate events filled with extended explorations of meaningless pablum, let me
Listen, you got to be careful now.
Yeah.
You got to really tell us how you feel. You can't. You can't. Join us for Straight Ahead, the Omni-American Podcast. Welcome to Straight Ahead, the Omni-American Podcast. I'm Greg Thomas, joined by my partner, Aryeh Tepper.
Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Now, today we intend to talk about a topic that I find quite interesting, and many others do, Black-Jewish dialogues and Black-Jewish relations. And I think this is a topic not only because of the periodic crazy statements made by celebrities or mistakes made by elites who should know better,
right?
But because I think from a personal perspective, my own relationships with Jewish people over time and the Jewish community over time has been one that has really benefited my life and led to the Omni-American Future Project that you and I co-lead. You know, there are many other reasons, but for me, that's foundational. Now, you, on the other hand, when I talked to you about this topic ahead of time,
Yeah, I hated the idea. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that in the present tense. I hate the idea.
Why?
Why do I hate the idea? All right. In order to explain why I hate why I hate events filled with extended explorations of meaningless pablum, let me...
Listen, you got to be careful now. Yeah. You got to really tell us how you feel. You can't. You can't.
These events, the Black-Jewish dialogue events, the type of events that we're talking about, what you have 95% of the time are Black liberals and Jewish liberals coming together. People who for whom being in the room with the other is in itself a cause for celebration. It gets them, they get excited. I'm in a room with these people and they're in a room with you. And there's lots of hugs. I'm not questioning the good intentions at all.
Okay.
I'm not questioning the deeply felt emotion.
Right.
But you have these people in the room together with extended speeches that say nothing, but they're going to tell you that this dialogue does something. It does something to me. It gets me bored and agitated. That's what it does for me. And Greg, I'm telling you, if I ever find myself at one of these events again, I'm going to raise my hand, right? And I'm going to say, in revenge for having attended this stupid pablum-filled event, I've decided to become an anti-Semite and a racist.
Oh my God! Oh, good Lord!
And now, wait a second. And I'm gonna stand there. I'm just gonna stand there because look.
See what happens.
I can pass for white, and then I'm gonna imagine if I'm gonna fill out the scene. I'm gonna say because you people, and I mean that in the pejorative, you Jews and you blacks, you people, if we're being honest, you make white people feel uncomfortable.
I didn't know that you had this comedic side to you, man. Okay. Well, listen. Let me say this on a relatively serious note.
Right.
That my issue with many of these dialogues is that it's the way it's framed. Black-Jewish relations, as if you have the entirety of millions, 30-something million Black Americans and however many Jewish Americans are in relationship. Well, we know that's not the case.
Right.
I think a better and more accurate and precise framing is that you have relationships between and among individuals. You have individual relationships, interpersonal relationships, and you have institutional relationships. So if we look at it through those lenses, then we can focus on the interpersonal dimensions and the institutional dimensions. For me, the interpersonal dimensions are crucial, man. I mean, my relationship with you, for example, that we've developed over 10 years.
Right. I prefer the word friendship, but go ahead.
What did I say?
Relationship.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yes, friendship, which is a particular kind of friendship. Relationship, friendship, which is a particular kind of relationship. Yeah. We're not just co-directors of the Omni-American Future Project. We are friends. Absolutely. And let me continue there. Growing up, for me, I had special relationships. I mean, me being a New Yorker, a native New Yorker, born in Brooklyn, New York in 1963. Right. Growing up in Brooklyn, moving to Staten Island. In Brooklyn, on East 52nd Street between Snyder and Tilden in East New York, I had friends of all kinds of different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. Had friends who were West Indian, Haitian and Jamaican. Had a Jewish friend named Alan. We all used to play together. We played stickball, Scully, and we had a great time together. But it was that foundational relationship that then, when I had a relationship with another Jewish peer named Howie in Staten Island in high school, we shared our love of music together. Right. He loved rock music. So I go over to his place. He would play Kiss. I had a love affair going with jazz. I would play jazz, and we would share.
Sure.
And these relationships over time, like after I graduated from Hamilton College, I had in the first 20 years of my working life, I could think about select folks who gave me a shot. And many times they were Jewish American. So my foundation in terms of this topic is grounded in my own experience and my interpersonal relationships. So I think that that's an important dimension that too often is not emphasized.
Oh, that's beautiful. But can we step back for one moment, a little mini digression? Would you mind painting a mini picture? Because it sounds beautiful. It's kind of a nostalgic picture, but could you paint for 1 minute what it looks like playing stickball in Brooklyn? What did that look like? Where are you all meeting? That doesn't happen anymore.
I know. Thank you. Well, it's a one-way street, right. And stickball is you have a long wooden stick, and you have a rubber ball. You have someone pitching. Okay, and you have someone behind them, who's there to catch the ball, right. and you're being pitched to, and you're hitting, right, and you create these makeshift bases, that corner over there, right. that landmark over here, right.
And now, are the neighbors around? Do y'all know the neighbors where you're playing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was very, very close-knit neighborhood.
And did it ever happen that sometimes someone hit the ball and it broke someone's window or?
But of course. These things happen. Yeah.
Those are beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. That's the real sense of community. That's right. That's happening within a community.
Right. So you can see why I might be a little more fond of the topic if you look at it through a certain lens. Right. But another lens, I think, that isn't discussed much these days would be the relationship among intellectuals from both communities and some of the conflicts that have happened over time between and among them. Now, you could look at those and say, well, those are interpersonal, and you don't have to just look at it as Black Jewish. But if Blackness and Jewishness are themes in those dialogues, then I think, though you can factor it in.
But let me ask you a question, and I think I know
Sure.
what you're referring to. In Norman Podhoritz's essay, was it Our Negro Problem? In mine, I don't remember the title, but back in the day. And then what
like
Baldwin wrote, and then Murray responded to Podhoritz. It was never published, but it's in the Library of America collection.
Right.
I never found any of those essays to be particularly nourishing. I don't go back to them for wisdom, for something that still speaks to me. Yeah.
Well, one that I go back to that preceded those would be the dialogue between Ralph Ellison and Irving Howe.
Right. Which is more serious and more to the point.
Right. So
and Ellison and Bellow were
very close friends. Yes, yeah. Saul Bellow and Ralph Ellison were very close friends. Again, I think to me, I'm interested in some of the friendships, in the interpersonal relationships that you find. But go ahead.
Well, in a sense, look, this is going to, you're a student of Albert Murray. It's not accidental. You're a student of Albert Murray. I wrote on Leo Strauss for my doctorate. I wrote on Leo Strauss on Maimonides. In Ravelstein, Bellow's book on Alan Bloom, Strauss is Professor Devar, 2 R's at the end. So you've got Bellow who's rooming with Ellison.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Murray, who's Ellison's friend. You're a student of Murray. And I'm not coming out of the same line, but I'm coming out of a connected line. And I think it's not accidental, because within the world of Jewish American letters, there's something robust that responds to the inner strength that was projected by Ralph Ellison, by Albert Murray,
right,
and by jazz,
right, and to keep the focus on Bellow for a second, I think it was in Ralph Ellison's collected letters, where Bellow, in writing about meeting Murray, I think this was perhaps in Paris in the 50s. And Bellow was like, who is this guy? Because, Murray's loquaciousness, his sense of life, his self-assuredness, his confidence is like, he didn't become a writer until a generation later. A published writer,
right.
10, 15, 20 years later.
Right.
But he had all of the confidence and verve and sense of life before then. And one of the things that I'm pretty sure I recall Bellow saying about Murray is that his insights into the problems of social science is something that he had not really thought of from that angle. And Bellow, and talking about Bellow, you're talking about one of the best read and learned novelists of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And then continuing along that line,
yep.
Bellow and Ellison were friends. Ellison was at least as well read as Bellow, and Murray was as well read as Ellison. So we're talking about the very heights of American literary culture when we're talking about these
and
folks.
Stanley Crouch wrote the introduction to Mr. Sandler's Planet, and he really cherished his friendship with Bellow. I think what you're pointing towards here is that, as opposed to the problem-filled events we were talking about earlier, what you have here is a meeting of the minds, in this case, literary sensibilities, artistic sensibilities, where they're meeting at the peaks. And I think that for a healthy Black American, Jewish American relationship, Black American, Jewish American, that the meeting has to take place at the peaks, because it's at the peaks where you meet as a human being. Maybe if you go back, you can start. This is something that you've spoken about before with at a concert in Manhattan at the end of January. But at the beginning, you can go back to Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, right? What they were doing. Maybe
That's right.
that,
With the Rosenwald schools. That's right.
Right. And then you can continue that in the 1938 Carnegie Hall concert, the friendship between Benny Goodman and Lionel Hampton. The friendship preceded that concert. At that concert, for those who don't know, Benny Goodman opened up the stage to Black American master musicians at a concert in 1938, which was the first time that jazz had been given center stage at a center of American concert music. The first time that a prestigious center of American culture had been desegregated. Took a lot of courage for Benny Goodman to do it. And Lionel Hampton was his good friend, played in his quartet and with the big band at that show. And their friendship continued after that as well. In the civil rights period, you had
even before the civil rights period, if you allow me, Lionel Hampton, speaking of Lionel Hampton,
right,
he visited Israel, did a series of concerts, after the establishment of the state of Israel. He loved the Jewish people, and he created the King David Suite.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece of music.
Absolutely. So it was in honor of King David, yes. But I also like to think I wasn't able to find verification of this in his bio or any scholarly text, but he was friends with David Ben-Gurion. So I think it may, have a little allusion to him also.
How close was he to, do you know how close he was to Ben-Gurion?
I don't know how close, but he knew him. He knew him. And they met. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. But now that was in the 50s. Right. Now go to the civil rights movement. What were you going to say?
Right. Then you have King and Heschel, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And King, who was very receptive to this same heroic spirit that manifested itself, that sense of life that was stylized in that heroic sense of life that was stylized into jazz. King heard it. I mean, his 1965 notes to the 64 to the Berlin Jazz Festival, where he says that this is triumphal music. And so he's filled with that same triumphant spirit, and who responded to that is Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was one of the great Jewish minds of the 20th century. And I think what you see when you look at it from, in order to look at it from this perspective, and this is, I think, crucial to also thinking about moving forward. When you're looking at this history, let's say we begin with Rosenwald and Washington, Hampton and Goodman,
Benny,
King and Heschel, you have a meeting, and then if we want to go back to Bellow, Ellison, etc., you're meeting at the peaks. And you have to have that elevated perspective to see it. But that elevated perspective is the story. Because what Albert Murray is talking about when he's talking about an Omni-American is actually a very deeply radical idea, which Brett Stevens in our recent conversation touched upon, which is that the idea that people from all over the world, from various backgrounds, are going to come together and meet as human beings with their cultural, as rooted cosmopolitans, rooted in their own traditions, but to meet as human beings, to meet as a human being, you have to meet at the peak. And I think that's the promise. If the United States of America is to become a culture, a country in which people are not judged by the color of their skin, et cetera, but by the content of their character, in order to fulfill the vision, however imperfectly, embedded in those founding documents, what you're talking about is a meeting as human beings. And you need a cultural complement that speaks that language, that elevated language, that difficult aspiration, that elevated, noble aspiration to meet as human beings. And that's what's embodied. That's what's offered. That's what stylized and projected in the Omni-American tradition, especially in jazz.
I totally agree. But people come and say, well, what happened though? What happened? And I think we need to riff on that some. And this is where the work of my man Stanley Crouch comes into play, where he talked about Black nationalism. You can talk about neo-Marxism.
Yep.
You can talk about the influence, the radicalization of the movement in the 1960s,
right.
Where you had Stokely Carmichael, who became the leader of SNCC,
right.
and advocated eventually for Black power.
Right.
You have a really an extreme radicalization of the movement into the Black Panthers. Yes, they had school lunch programs and this and that, and yes, they were set up based on the right to arm themselves and to have self-defense. So you had this radicalization and these extreme elements, and they became more and more towards violence and advocating for violence. But then you have these people, some of them who didn't survive, but those who did oftentimes went into the academy. And so you have in the academy the infusion of ideas that are not based on the heights, that are not based on the best principles of the founding documents of the United States. Ideas from postmodernism, as I mentioned, neo-Marxism.
Today, I think we can look at it as the roots of what today is the identification with the post-colonial perspective. In a sense, the importation of the post-colonial perspective as a means for understanding the Black American experience, and then as a means for looking at Jews as within this matrix of the post-colonial hierarchy. We'll devote a future episode. We'll talk about this.
Sure. I mean, I agree, because you had a thesis discussed starting, I think, in the 60s, that Black Americans are a nation within a nation. And therefore, we're the colonial subjects. Now you could say that there's some veracity to that, but I'm sorry, we are central. We're not, colonial subjects. We are central to the culture and civilization that is America. Yes, we were enslaved. Yes, we went through the Jim Crow period post the betrayal of the Reconstruction. Absolutely. Yes, there remain problems and remnants that come from that today. Yes. Yes to all of that. But yes, also to the fundamental role and contribution of the ethnocultural group we call Black Americans, of which I am a part, that created this tradition, this Omni-American tradition, this tradition that deals and focuses on how you have a mixture of elements out of many one. So you've got the many traditions, styles, approaches, backgrounds. But what's the oneness? The oneness is based on a shared American identity grounded in our democratic aspirations and our civic aspirations. And without having a vision for those aspirations grounded in those values, what are we going to be basing our civic and cultural interactions? The cultural piece, if you talk about the arts, I mean, you find it there. You mentioned jazz. But in the civic piece, and this gets back to the original topic of our conversation, not in terms of Black-Jewish dialogue, but in terms of democratic dialogue. We have to be able to talk about issues that we have disagreements about. We have to be able to talk about it with respect. Like in jazz, you're trading fours. So you have your say, I have my say. And you do that respectfully. So many of the answers and models are actually found in the music.
Right.
But you know what I mean?
Look, what I'm hearing is that we have to keep the important things in mind. And I think the most important thing, we have to remember the important things. And the most important thing is the soul. And the language of postmodernism, the language of neo-Marxism, the language of post-colonialism has nothing to say about the soul, the cultivating the soul. The soul doesn't find a home there. In order, and at bottom, at the end of the day, even though we're talking about a Black American, Jewish American, or Black American Jewish meeting, not dialogue, right? When we're talking about this elevated meeting, but what are we really talking about? We're not talking about something that has a particular, we're talking about a very human. If we're doing it right, it has an ultimate human meeting. And that's what's beautiful about our friendship. And that's what's beautiful about the friendships that we're talking about. I don't like you, Greg Thomas, because you have mocha brown skin. That's not why I like you. I like you because of the human being that you are and the richness in what you have to offer. You don't like me because of my rosy cheeks. You like me because of what of the human being that I am. It's enriching. What each one of us brings is enriching. But that's the story is not a story for Black people or for Jewish people. The story is a human story. The Omni-American vision, the Omni-American tradition is a language, is a vocabulary, which allows people from all different backgrounds to bring their wealth with them, but to meet at the end of the day as human beings.
I agree. And I would just do a slight counter statement to close that you do actually have in the Omni-American Future Project a Black American organization, a Jazz Leadership Project that my wife and I run, and two Jewish organizations, the American Sephardi Federation and the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement. So on the institutional, organizational front,
100%.
It is a connection. And then if you go to Danielle Allen's Justice by Means of Democracy, she talks about the need in culture to have bridging elements.
Right.
And so the Omni-American Future Project, from the perspective of the Black American, Jewish American institutional relationship, is a bridging element that is an example for the way others can bridge their differences.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for our show today. We thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching us on Straight Ahead, the Omni-American Podcast.
Subscribe today and fight for a future in which the many join as one against bigotry.